You were listening to The Unhappy Hour Sports Radio Show on the NewAmericanMedia.com.
Hey everybody, happy Friday. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Brian, and yes, this is indeed The Unhappy Hour Sports Program. Brought to you from a Cleveland fan's perspective. That's why it's The Unhappy Hour. It's supposed to be Friday, East Coast, end of a long week. Sit back with a beverage, some good friends, talk about all those great championships that you celebrated. Well, in Cleveland, we don't have that. We've never celebrated anything so long as I've been alive. In fact, it's been since 1964. 1964, since there have been any championships in Cleveland. So that's why it's called The Unhappy Hour, but we're very happy that you took the time out of your day to join us today. Thank you so much. There's a lot going on in the world of sports. I don't know what's going on, but it seems like the only big stories are injuries right now. We have Mariano Rivera. Mariano Rivera suffered a torn ACL, 42 years old, and a torn meniscus in his right knee after he fell awkwardly to the ground while shagging a fly ball during batting practice Thursday night. But he says he's coming back. He says, "I'm coming back. Write it down in big letters," he tells reporters. "I'm not going out like this." Yeah, it was it was a freak accident. I guess for 15, 20 years he's been in batting practice before the games, just catching fly balls. Just going out there and catching fly balls. Getting some exercise, staying active, staying moving. And I watched a video of this. He hit the warning track and went down awkwardly. Started holding his knee. Pretty unfortunate. So I don't like the Yankees. I certainly don't like the Yankees, but we are going to send our thoughts and prayers out to Mariano Rivera. Take it from me, a guy who's had a torn ACL. I know what that does to your life. It really just changes everything, and it might be different if you're a professional athlete. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's even worse. I just don't know, but I know it's very difficult. Moving on, Terrell Suggs tears his Achilles. Baltimore Ravens linebacker partially tears his Achilles tendon during a conditioning drill in Arizona. He thinks he can return by the middle of this year. We'll see how that works. He says he's not on crutches, but he will be having surgery next week. Suggs will be turning 30. 30. It just seems like he just got into the league. Now, this is the NFL Defensive Player of the Year last season. 70 tackles, 14 sacks. And let me say, as a Cleveland Browns fan, I'm not shedding tears over the fact that the Ravens are going to be a weaker team without this gentleman. However, once again, I do want to say I don't really root for injuries because I have torn my ACL and my labrum, my shoulder as well. So knee and a shoulder, and I know what it does. It's really difficult. It really takes a lot out of you. So, well, if I can send thoughts and prayers out to a Yankee, I can send thoughts and prayers out to Terrell Suggs. I guess. Grumble. That was another big injury that occurred. How about this weird injury? Amari Stoudemire suffers lacerations to his left hand. Lacerations to his left hand. He punched a fire extinguisher, that break glass in case of emergency. Well, who hasn't been mad and taken it out on an inanimate. That is hard to say. An inanimate object before. But he needed stitches to close the wound and underwent a surgical procedure on Tuesday to repair a small muscle in his hand. Thoughts and prayers go out to Amari Stoudemire. And let's not forget the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls. Derrick Rose, MVP of the National Basketball Association last year, tears his ACL in his left knee on Saturday. Man, it feels like he did that about a month ago. But it has occurred since our last program. We do this every Friday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Thank you again for joining us here on thenewamericanmedia.com. He tore his ACL in his left knee on Saturday. That is really tough for the Bulls. I mean, to lose an MVP like that right in the playoffs, it's hard. No love for the Bulls, but thoughts and prayers go out to Derrick Rose and the Bulls. And then, of course, you have here Junior Seau. This really hit us. I played defensive end back in high school, and middle linebacker is a lot like defensive end in a couple of ways. And you work closely. I worked very closely with a really good middle linebacker at my high school. But really, it's about knowing where you're supposed to be, swarming to the ball. And Junior Seau was one of the best middle linebackers that we've ever seen. And he died. Yeah, he died a couple of days ago, and now people are asking questions. It's been ruled not a homicide, but a suicide by the San Diego County Medical Examiner. So he was found on Wednesday, ruled a suicide Thursday, and then on Friday comes the story that the family of Junior Seau will allow researchers to study his brain for signs of damage caused by concussions suffered during his 20-year NFL career, according to Chargers team chaplain Sean Mitchell. Now that's interesting, because you've been hearing a lot of stuff about concussions leading to mental health issues. There have been a few players that have. Mike Webster, Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He passed away. And they're trying to stay connected with this story. And Dave Duerson. His brain has been studied and analyzed. There's a research institute, Boston University Center for the Study of Traumatic Encephalopathy. A lot of big words today. Yeah, Arizona Cardinals defensive back Dave Duerson. Yeah, there's a lot of people who have been having problems when they leave the game of football, whether it's exactly because of a injury or not, but they're trying to determine this. So Junior Seau's brain is going to be studied to see if there was any impact from concussions. I don't know. Don't know, but that's what today's show is going to be about, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. We're going to bring into the program Terry Russell. Terry is the executive director of NAMI, Ohio. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. He's been in mental health for 40 years. He has a family member that suffers with a mental illness. He's going to join our program today to talk about this a little bit, the role that depression can play in 1 in 5 families of being affected with depression, or mental illness, rather. So we're going to bring Terry into the program right now.
Terry Russell.
Hi, Terry. It's Brian with thenewamericanmedia.com. You are live on the air. How are you doing today, sir?
Real good, Brian. How are you?
I'm living the dream, of course. We have introduced you as the executive director of NAMI, Ohio, and discussed that you've been in the mental health profession for 40 years. You want to talk about what got you into this field and what you've been doing over the past few decades?
Yeah, I've been really blessed. I grew up with a brother 15 years older than myself who had a mental illness, schizophrenia, and really didn't understand it. When you're young kids, you don't understand it. I was really mad at my brother for his symptoms, but I think that really was a hand on my shoulder to bring me into this field, and I went overseas back in the 60s and came back and went to Ohio State University and ended up working for the Ohio Department of Mental Health, and then I started working for a mental health system and ran a fairly large system for 25 years, and then decided that I wanted to do something other than working within the system and became an advocate. And we're the largest advocate organization in the country. My board of directors are made up of family members and people with these illnesses, and it's just really been great. I've done it for 14 years now, and I'm very pleased.
Well, I want to get right into that there, because you said something very interesting. I think we should put the magnifying glass over for just a minute. You said you were blessed living with your brother who had a mental illness or has a mental illness. I understand what you're saying, that this has led you to your career, but if you're willing to discuss it a little bit, what type of symptoms did you deal with, and how long did it take you to realize before there was something legitimately physically wrong that was causing this, and kind of explain your process from a child to a young adult learning about this disease yourself?
Yeah, I probably didn't know when I was a teenager. Matter of fact, my first memory really was as a 13-year-old boy coming home on a school bus, and when I pulled up to the curb, my brother was being taken out of the house in a paddy wagon, a police car, taken over to the old state hospital. And when I went into the house, I went in the back bedroom. My mother was really distraught. But the first thing she said to me, and for some reason I've always remembered this, she says, "What are the neighbors going to think, and what are the people at the church going to think?" It was my first being confronted with stigma around this illness. And then I watched my brother, and he did very well, and the older he got, he did better. He has unfortunately passed away 5 years ago, and he will always probably people remember him with his mental illness, and he was much more than that. He was a very soft-spoken, very good person, and I realized that these illnesses are no different than any other illnesses, and I've done a lot of studying on this. And but our society has, for some reason, can't accept the symptoms. And the symptoms, if someone has a heart condition or cancer or something, you may not even know they have that. When you suffer from a mental illness, many times the symptoms are so bizarre that people are scared around it and shy away and create a stigma. And unfortunately, that causes some of the problems, and I think one of the reasons we're talking today is people don't want to go out and get services. They're ashamed of an illness. These are brain disorders, no different than any other illness, and the brain is the most complex organ of the body. So I think when I say I was blessed, I started to understand when I came back and went to school, and then was working in the system that my brother back then, that was 1959, when he went in and out of state hospitals time and time again, I just learned that these are illnesses and that I may make somebody's life different, and we have. Our success rates when a person seeks treatment are much greater than most other illnesses, so that's why I say it's a blessing.
Well, you gave us a quote earlier today, and I think this is one that we put out on Facebook and then on the radio site, that the brain disorders are not character flaws. They're a physical problem, just like a heart disease or cancer. Let's expand upon that just a little bit, because you did touch on it, but I think it's a very important point to make and expand upon there, because a lot of people can say, oh, that guy's a jerk, or that woman's really rude, or, oh, they're so selfish. But a lot of these things that some people will say is a character flaw could be the symptom of a disease, something that's not firing neurologically correctly inside of the brain. So do you want to take that anywhere and expand upon it just a little bit, because I think it's a very important point to make.
Yeah, again, I just know that in our society, mental illness is most misunderstood, and because of that, and we continue to see it, people judge and make decisions. For example, what we're talking about Junior, and the suicide that just took place this week. We're looking for causation, and we know what causes these things, and we know what can help. But what happens is people look at, unfortunately, families. 57% of all caregiving for people with mental illness are families. And they certainly are ill-equipped to deal with someone who is hearing voices or delusional or whatever the symptom may be, and they get frustrated. And what we see is many people with these illnesses lose everyone around them. And that's why I think you see today we closed all the state hospitals around the country. And that's why I think we now have institutions of prisons and jails and homeless shelters and flop houses and nursing homes. We have alarming number of mentally ill people under 40 in nursing homes. And it's because our society hasn't accepted this like we do all other illnesses, and they look at it as character flaws, as bad behaviors that they can change. If a person has a heart condition or cancer, they can't say, "Oh, I'm going to change and it'll be all over." But we think in mental illness that can happen. If he just straighten up, if he wouldn't act that way. But they have to remember that the brain is the most complex organ of the body, and why would we think it would not have some illness at points? And those illnesses create these behaviors. And the person, I don't know anybody. I have never heard one person say, "I want to be mentally ill." You just don't want to be mentally ill. And it's not character flaws. It's not because they're just bad people or anything else. It's because they have an illness of the brain that is treatable. And so, sometimes we get the messages. I mean, the messages have been out there, and I see more and more times where people can get help, but it's just not enough.
Well, you were saying that the success rate is actually pretty good once you can get past the stigma of not talking about it and worrying what the people at church and the neighbors are going to think. You had mentioned that the success rate is pretty good compared to other illnesses. Talk about that for a minute.
Absolutely. One of the things, my brother, when he was ill, we really had two things to do. We could send him to a state hospital and lock him away in a big concrete room. Matter of fact, the state hospital in Columbus, Ohio, was the largest building under one roof until the Pentagon was built.
Wow.
It was just amazing how big that old hospital was, and we could send him to hospitals. The other thing he had was a major tranquilizer. We could make him a zombie. We could put him on a tranquilizer, and he'd walk around and not say anything and sleep all the time. Those are the only things. I've seen the change. This is a blessing. I've watched the new medications that have been developed, the new therapies that have been developed, and in major depression, which is one of the leading causes of suicide in our society, we have about an 80% cure rate. And when I say cure, I have to always buffer that by saying the success rate in that the depression may not go away, but it's certainly manageable.
Right.
Where a person can live a productive life, go out there and I'm going to tell you, there's people that you walk in, you work with every day, or you somehow in your life are with these people that have a mental illness that you don't even know it. When you look at the statistics, they're staggering. That 1 in 4 adults in their lifetime will experience a mental illness of some sort. There's over 2.4 million Americans that suffer from schizophrenia, and when tonight's conversation more on major depressions, about 6.7% of all people in the United States of America have a major depression. 6.7%. But if they get into treatment, and both through the new medications we have, which I call miracles, and there's been a lot of people who criticize our our pharmaceutical industry, and I do criticize them for the cost of the medications. But I don't want them to start making something else, lipstick or something. I want them to keep going out there and finding that silver bullet. Think about diabetes and how we've been able to change that illness because we found something that manages it.
Well, I can't help but talk about this, and obviously we discussed this today because we're thinking about Junior Seau and him taking his life, and we weren't there. We don't have access to his medical files. We weren't inside of his head, so we're going to expand this a little bit away from Junior Seau. But you mentioned something a minute ago, and I just started thinking of my good friend. He had to take in his mother. She was homeless. She has some mental issues, and it's been a real strain on him. He said, hey, she would do it for me, and I commend him for that, because you touched on this a second ago, and it really hit home for me instantly, thinking of my buddy who lives right around the corner over here, and he has to care for his mother. Talk about that for just a second, because the people around the person with the mental disorder, whether it's clinical depression or bipolar or schizophrenia, talk a little bit about NAMI and some of the other resources out there, because he's come to me and we've had a couple beers and we've talked about things, and I just don't know what to tell him, and I like you said, there's a lot of other people going through this as well. What type of resources do you have that might point them to some more information, some more assistance?
I would urge anybody that's listening to this or hearing what we're talking about is to look at the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They're in Orange County and all over. There's a state organization. They can get on the website. Just go to NAMI, California. Family members go through experiences that none of us can even imagine.
Right.
I've got a lot of stories I could tell you about that. And it is it's such an ugly illness is because the person that you raise, the person that you love, the symptoms sometimes change that person's behavior so you don't even know them. In addition, the illness, for whatever reason, many times the symptoms are that the individual takes out their frustration of the illness on the people that care the most about them. So those two things make a real strain on family care, and again, that's why I believe that we have so many people who lose every social supports they have, from their families to friends to everybody. People just shun them. I always tell a story that I had my gallbladder out one time, and I woke up right after the surgery, and there were 20 people in my room, and I said, get the heck out of my room. I'm hurting.
You lash out at the people that are showing you love.
Right. But I can also go to a hospital where there's a mentally ill person, there's nobody in the room. They're by themselves. Nobody. They've just burnt so many bridges, and we have at NAMI. It's basically run by the families. It was started in Wisconsin by 4 mothers who couldn't get help for their loved ones, and it gives the support that we have a signature program called Family to Family that's provided all over California. That's a 12-week course. They go. It's taught by family members, volunteers. And I've never had anybody go through that didn't say it saved our family's life. We understand now what we're dealing with. It gives you everything you need to know about what's affecting your loved one. So I would urge anybody to do that. But for your friend, again, he has to remember that this isn't his illness, and he has to keep himself healthy. We have seen a trend, an alarming trend in the last few years, and some people are talking about genetics and whole different areas, that families, we're seeing more mental illness pop up in the same families. And some of that, I feel, there's no doubt we know that major depression, there's many things in society that causes stress and anxiety, and all of that plays to major depressions where a person really becomes incapable of functioning in our society.
We're talking live with Terry Russell, Executive Director of NAMI, Ohio. Terry, you mentioned the story of coming out of a surgery and kind of lashing out at some of the people around you. And we led our show off today. It was really interesting because in the world of sports, Mariano Rivera just blew out his knee. Terrell Suggs of the Ravens, star linebacker, NFL Player of the Year, just blew out his knee. Amari Stoudemire gets mad after a game and punches a fire extinguisher, break glass in case of emergency, and slices up his hand. The Derrick Rose, the MVP of the NBA, blows out his knee. So a lot of these stories right now are revolving around the major players in these different sports who are going through major surgeries. Now, let's talk about that for a second. When someone like a Junior Seau or like any of these other athletes I mentioned, everything that they had been doing has to stop as they undergo a surgical procedure and then the long road back. What starts to happen inside of the mind of somebody when everything you know has been put on a shelf, it's completely out of reach, there's a bunch of frustration? What type of mental strain is that going to put on a professional athlete, be it Junior Seau, who played 18, 20 years in the NFL and then stopped and had a hard time transitioning to a quote-unquote normal life, or for an MVP of the NBA who blows out his knee in playoff time? What's going on mentally there with these people?
Well, I think there is no doubt that if you look, matter of fact, we work with colleges all over our state because of these illnesses many times start around the age of 19 to 22. And so you have a lot of college students and you have all the pressures and being away from home. So there is the extra activities that you're not used to that you have to deal with. And then you talk about someone who's retiring or somebody who's... But I look at that a little differently than just athletes. If this show was about people working in a car plant or working anywhere, what we're seeing in our society, these are biological based. It's not. They're not based. The brain is changing. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, and I think the National Institute of Mental Health is trying to work diligently on, is one of the highest rate of suicides today are people over 65. They come out of their employment. They're depressed. They've lost their health. There's health issues. Some of them are empty nesters, so their families are just all over the country, and they feel alone. And all at once, they start to develop what can just start for all of us, and I think most of us can honestly say you've been depressed at some time about something in your life, and these then develop into a biological base where the brain starts functioning differently than it did. And it causes behaviors that we can't understand, and we certainly can't understand many of the behaviors of these athletes that do what they do. And I really do think some of, not just suicide, but you talked about punching a fire hydrant, and all of these anger things. A lot of that comes from society today, that we all feel that we have to be special, that we have to be the best, and we put more pressure. There is more pressure, and I think some of that's just because of the technology today. We hear about it, and within 30 minutes of anything that happens in the world, and when that happens, you start feeling, boy, this world's tough, and this situation's tough, and all at once you become depressed, and then all at once you get into a position where you don't want to get out of bed, you won't eat, you won't clean yourself, you won't take baths, on and on and on, and all these symptoms get stronger. And we have an epidemic in this country with suicide right now. It is alarming at the increase in suicides over the past 10 years.
And you said that there were, I think the number you gave earlier was 1 in 5 families are affected by mental illness. I mean, 20% is a
Absolutely.
Very high number. Talk about that a little bit, because this isn't just a star athlete that, I'm not going to be MVP of the NBA. I'm 5'10". But, this isn't just for MVPs of the league or for all-stars in the NBA or professional football players. This is 20% of all families, 1 in 5. How does it connect? Like you said, if it's not you, you're saying this is a brother in your case, or it could be a
Right.
spouse, or it could be a coworker, it could be someone else that you're living with, a son or a parent.
The National Institute of Health has done study after study, and that's where that number comes from, that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 families deal with it. And I will tell you this, next time you go with the buddy that you said with the mother, if you're with another 10 buddies, ask if they have anybody in their family, if they're willing to say, I have an aunt, uncle, brother with a mental illness, and they'll say, yes, I've done it. I mean, obviously, in my profession, I'm sensitive to it, so I watch, but I rarely go anywhere in a new environment with new people that the minute that they say that what I do for a living, that within the next 10 minutes somebody doesn't come up and tell me about the problems they're having with their brother or their mother or their aunt or uncle. It's just amazing. And I think we in this country need to think about that. What are we going to do about that? We need to do more research. We need to find out why. We need to find out what the new pressures of society on all of us, how that's creating it. The other thing is, and I may be wrong on this, but I've also did some studying in history and look in the 40s and the 30s. I'm not sure there wasn't a lot of mental health going on back then, but nobody recognized it. Nobody knew about it. It was hidden behind, Aunt Ethel was put up in the attic or kept in her bedroom. So I'm not sure that there's any environmental causations, but it just seems like to me it's an epidemic now that we need to address. Mental illness needs to be addressed right now. By the way, we're having a terrible thunderstorm right here, so if you hear in the background thunder, that's what it is.
Well, if you were ever to meet my wife, she would be quite envious. She misses the precipitation and actual quote-unquote weather, because out here in Southern California, it's usually 75 to 85 and almost no precipitation or weather anytime. It's kind of weird, and you talk about, I studied in psychology a little bit, what do they call it? A mood affective disorder, when if you're in the doldrums of, like you said, a thunderstorm or something, that if you've been going for, whether they call it cabin fever or not, if it's gloomy, if it's cold, if it's wet, if it's rainy, it tends to have a certain type of dampening effect. But being out here in Southern California, I've taken it a step further, and I've noticed a lot of Southern California natives, they're not very well, and not everybody, of course. I know many great people, but I've noticed that a lot of Southern California natives are not very well-rounded, because at least weather-wise, everything's usually pretty good. But in a place like Ohio, you've had the extreme ups, you've had the extreme downs. You can have all 4 seasons within the same week. And I know we're getting a little off topic here, slightly, but have you noticed?
I'd like to be inside. Your wife can come and visit here, and I'll come out there because the winters here are brutal, and I really like warm weather. But I do, the mood thing is very important. That again, when you have support, so not just moods, but you have a supportive system. I don't care how much treatment that you receive. You could go to a community mental health center, and I urge anybody to do that needs help. You can go talk to a psychiatrist. You can be on medications. But if you walk out that door and you don't have someone who knows your name, or you don't have a place to go, or you've lost everything around you, I don't think you're going to get well very fast. All of us need those support systems. We need to be in places that we like to be. And gloomy places is not something that's going to help our moods. And all of that leads to depression, and then it gets worse when it becomes a major depression, because there's a difference between depression and major depressions. And when it becomes a major depression, then you're so disabled that without help, you really have a hard time functioning every day.
Well, I'm going to get right back to mood for just a second. I'm going to pause on my thought because I'm going to blend this right back into sports in a second. We'll come back to mood.
Sure.
We're talking with Terry Russell, Executive Director of NAMI, Ohio. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. But when you're talking about something like depression versus major depression, let's break this down here for a second, because In some ways, there is no difference when someone hears this, but in another way, there's a huge difference between depression and major depression. Let's kind of define both terms a little bit so we can kind of start to see the differences, because a lot of people don't know the difference, and it makes a big difference.
Again, anybody listening or hearing what we're saying, they have been depressed. I mean, you know, when you're in school, you don't do well on a test, and then you get into a depression. Marital problems. Most people who are going through any kind of marital problems, they certainly are depressed about the situation they find themselves in, and we find ourselves in every day in situations that we're happy, and other times we're sad. And maybe a way to talk about depression is sad. We feel very sad. The difference, though, is that's not ongoing. 5 days after the test, you take another test, you do well, and you go out and have a good time with your buddies. Major depression, it just grows and grows and grows to where you become dysfunctional. And that's the key. And dysfunctional means that you can't hold a job. Again, I have a lot of the symptoms. There's hundreds of different symptoms, but a common symptom is they just can't even get out of bed. They're so depressed, or they can't go to work, or they can't be around people. They can't do anything. And then, in addition to that, at some point they become delusional, where your depression is so bad you really get paranoid, feeling that everybody's against you, the world's against you, your family's against you, everybody's against you. There's people out to get you. I'd like to have a dime for every time I've talked to clients who said the FBI keeps following them, because they're general symptoms of these illnesses, and they're me and you too. That's the importance. This isn't just some person out there that you can't see or feel or you don't know. These are all of us. This happens, and you don't want it to happen, but it happens because of brain function. It's a disorder of the brain. But then, again, I keep saying 80% success rate in treatment of major depressions if you get treatment. If you don't get treatment, then I think you're in trouble. As a matter of fact, we talk about athletics. Terry Bradshaw.
Right.
Terry Bradshaw had major depression, said his life, and I think he's even talked about suicidal thoughts and other things. And he went in and got treatment, and now he goes all over the country speaking about it, speaking how it changed his life by getting the treatment that made life better for him, made life acceptable for him. It made it so that he wasn't thinking terrible things.
Well, I'll tell you what, Terry Russell with NAMI, Ohio, that's National Alliance on Mental Illness, you're helping me with these segues here, because it's like we're 2 steps ahead of ourselves, like we're playing a game of chess here, because the FBI following them is going to be a great segue into the next thing I'm going to talk about with you, but I wanted to get back to the mood thing that I said I was going to return to. There's a book that I'm working on called There's Only Next Year, and the reason we get together on this sports show, it's called the Unhappy Hour. You know, this is supposed to be a time, Friday, 6 o'clock on the East Coast. You're done with a long work week, get together with your buddies, hang out, and talk about the good times. You know, hey, remember when LeBron James won those championships? Or, hey, remember when Jose Mesa got that save in the World Series? Hey, remember when, go down the line, when Art Modell didn't leave when he could have, and they won that Super Bowl in Cleveland? My question to you is this. This is the time of year that a lot of Clevelanders and Cleveland sports fans that are displaced, whether it's my buddy Ben in Chicago, myself in Los Angeles, or everybody else that I talk to across the globe, really, we're watching our ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, however you want to relate to it. We're watching LeBron James excel in the NBA playoffs for another team. You know, and it's been 2 years in a row that the Cavs have been miserable, and we were so close for so many years. My question is, what happens to the mood of a people when a city like Cleveland with 3 major sports, basketball, football, and baseball, can't win a championship despite having amazingly talented, fantastically coached teams over decades from 64 to 74, 84, 94, 04? You know, we're getting close to 50 years of ineptitude. One of the main thesis points of my book is, let's get into what happens to a state when your parents and grandparents tell you, we'll find a way to screw this up, oh, we never win anything. We always get beat in the end. And I really think there's something to this when decade after decade, it sort of starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'll just open it up to you there, but it's a book I'm working on. It's something I'm very interested in, and I think there's definitely a psychological component to this.
There's no doubt. And, I think if you're going to write a book about go and study Cleveland when LeBron left. That was one of the most interesting phenomena I've ever seen. I mean, that city was angry. It was depressed. It acted out. Some like individuals with these illnesses. And obviously I'm not an expert in this area why all these things happen, but I think you hit on something that many times in today's society we put expectations above reality. We see what's going on with everybody else, and there's envy involved and all of those things, which doesn't lead to a healthy life of who we are. What we do is valuable, no matter what your skill level and what you do. I really think we have to start talking more in a positive nature. This whole society right now, look at the political climate, the anger in political climates. And I know that's not new, but it seems to me that we should be talking a more positive to each other. You said something a minute ago about your buddies on Friday night, and it's supposed to be the time of good times, going out and have a few beers with your friends. I ask you to call the friend that doesn't go out anymore. Call him and say, come on, let's go out and see if you can convince him that he needs to get involved again and get help if he needs help. Because there are so many people. I really appreciate what you say. I think people do try to Friday nights, the night to go out and really enjoy oneself. But there's so many people that go home and stay there and lock themselves away. And that's just not right. We need to walk in and help. That's one of the things that we find out people don't do it anymore. Families were closer back in the years before. And now with the extended families all over the country, it becomes difficult. So what you're saying about society, I really think your first chapter should be Cleveland, Ohio. LeBron leaves. What happens? Because it was ugly. And it had a lot of similarities to mental health active behavior.
But it still is ugly. I watched this interview. It was a really good show called Iconoclasts. It was on the Sundance Network on cable. I don't even know what channel and who carries it, but we had it out here. And I watched this interview. They'd pair two people up, either an athlete or a musician or an author or a chef, and they just put them together and film them for a while. And they had Maya Angelou, the poet and the civil rights pioneer, author, poet, lecture speaker, with comedian and actor Dave Chappelle. And Dave Chappelle was asking her, kind of trying to relive the 60s when Martin Luther King was assassinated, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and, Robert Kennedy, and all these things happening. And Maya Angelou, I always come back to this because it just made such an impression on me that she said, you can't hold on to anger. Anger is like a cancer. It does nothing to the object you're angry at. It just devours yourself and makes yourself sick. And I've been fighting this for 2 years because I cannot I can't even really say his name. I have a hard time saying his name, the guy who took his talents south. I can't really even I don't want to root for an injury because that's really bad karma. I don't want to go there, but I can't let go of the guy that had everything in front of him here. We were all in this together, and he just totally let us down. And I've said this before, too. As far as LeBron, who went to Miami 2 years ago, he had the unique opportunity in a recession, a great recession, whatever you want to call this economic collapse that we're kind of in the middle of. He could have been a Rocky Balboa character that the country could have looked to and said, hey, if you can do this as MVP and bring a championship to Cleveland, come on, America, we can do this together. Let's pull ourselves up. Let's make this happen. And instead, it was just a sucker punch to the gut. And we never got over 9/11. We haven't gotten over this 2008 collapse. And especially as Cleveland sports fans, we haven't gotten over this LeBron thing. So what would you say to someone like me that really takes this personal? And obviously it's just sports, but What would you say to me as a
Well,
mental
if
health
you're in a
professional?
therapy session right now, I would say go back to the people that talk about not holding on to anger, and not holding on to the negatives. What happened? And I may disagree with you a little bit. Your profession is sports, and you're so just like mine's the mental health arena. But I don't see the anger and the depression and the same feelings as the week that LeBron James left Cleveland.
I'll give you that. I will give you that. I agree.
Yeah, I think people, go on and then something else happens, but that's a good analogy with mental illness. If you're depressed, over time, something else happens and you go on. It's when you get stuck in that
Right.
anger. You get stuck in that behavior that's not healthy to you. And the other thing is, there's only one person that can change that. I could tell you right now, I could give you all kinds of possible solutions, but you're going to make that decision. You're going to ultimately be the one responsible for yourself. And we talk about that in mental illness a long time. I can't tell my sick brother, get well. Now, I can certainly lead him in a way to help him find the solutions to these terrible illnesses, and try to make sure that he appropriately takes his medication, appropriately gets to his therapy sessions or whatever the treatment may be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as individuals, we have a responsibility to, I don't know what the word, maybe in sports lingo, it's suck up. We got to go on and go to the next issue. And again, I really appreciate your analogy with 9/11 and the killings of our presidents and all this. It's a tough world out here.
You're right.
It is a tough world, and communications let us know what's going on. I'd like not to know sometimes when I hear. And let me bring this back to another topic, but it's somewhat related. Because of that, we hear all these things. For example, horrendous crimes. The shooting of the congresswoman in Arizona and I can go to L.A. You always hear the person was mentally ill when a crime was committed. The fact is, there are people that rob banks every day that have heart conditions and cancer, and they never open it up with the cancer patient robbed the bank yesterday. But I tell you what, if it's a mentally ill person, that's the first thing.
There was a hit and run, and he had a severe case of gout.
Right. You never hear that, but if it's mental illness, you hear it. Boy, that was a close one.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being punished here for talking, I don't know, about LeBron James. I don't want to talk about him anymore. That makes the thunder go off. But what I'm saying here is we as individuals first have to take care of ourselves. And I tell families that every day. I had a father call me yesterday, and he's got a son who's very ill, who has moved away, and every time the father tries to make contact, the son sends him an email just laced with vulgarity and how terrible he is. And this particular father is just a loving person. He's a caring person. He just wants to care for his son. And I told him the other day, you got to step back and take care of yourself, because you're letting this affect you, and
Right.
you can control you. You can't control your son. And I think all of us would be better off a little bit if we could do that. It's easy to say, but and by the way, I hope they lose the rest of the series. So I'm not over it either, but.
Same here, and I'm sure we have listeners that are going to love hearing that, because it's one thing to pull for your boy, it's one thing to root for your, and I've said for a while, I root for jerseys, I root for laundry. Whoever's in it, that's fine. I'm still pulling for my team and having a little bit of sense of civic pride. But yeah, I mean, I'm still pulling for the Heat to lose. But let me just bring it back here, because we're starting to run out of time. We got about just a little over 10 minutes left. We're talking with Terry Russell, Executive Director of NAMI Ohio. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I read this story and it sounded really interesting, because you were talking about the climate politically right now. And I found this story. This Daniel Suelo, 51 years old and broke. Happily broke, consciously, deliberately, blessedly broke. This guy, he just completely went off the grid and he said this is right around the time the economy crashed. It felt like a lot of what he was saying was prophetic, his friend said. He said that money is an illusion, an addiction, and that resonated with me after the collapse of the economy. You know, a lot of people are just really disenfranchised right now. We don't trust Democrats. We don't trust Republicans. We think they're two sides of the same corrupt coin. The credit card has gone up to $15 trillion under both parties' watch, and it's like people just don't know what to do. What would you say to someone that's just thinking about going off the grid like that and just opting out of this entire system, and just people that are recognizing that there's a scam somewhere, something is wrong somewhere, whether we can clearly articulate it and define it or not? It seems like the entire nation is waking up and saying something is wrong, and we're trying to identify it right in time for a political presidential run where we're going to be trying to be divided under religion or race or sex or socioeconomic bracket. It just seems like we're being divided. What are we supposed to do right now?
You know, again, this relates to what I'm really big on this self-responsibility, is I think each of us, what just amazes me when I hear polls or I talk to people, everybody believes what you just said. I think it's 9% approval rating of Congress today.
Right.
If we all feel that way, then why don't we do something about it instead of playing at it and talking about it and griping about it? I think, again, you know, I always bring it back to mental illness, but what I said about your buddies, taking your buddy that doesn't come anymore.
Right.
I think, you know, we need to go talk to each other about what we can do to make it better, what we can do as individuals. Sometimes I feel my hands are tied when I watch the presidential debates and somebody says something and say, well, that's just wrong. I don't believe that. And I feel powerless to say that's not the way it is. But, you know, as an individual, I can do whatever I think is
Right.
best, and I can get others with like thoughts and even with non-like thoughts to discuss these things in a civil way.
Just agree to disagree, but have an intelligent, rational, thought-provoking, challenging conversation. It's like that's disappeared somewhere.
It's disappeared because of our communication. I keep always coming back to that because we see everything. We don't have those. You know, the neighborhoods used to be neighborhoods where you'd have neighborhood parties where you'd know your neighbors. You know, we live in societies now that you don't know your neighbor. You don't visit your neighbors. And all of this is because of the loss of individual. We've lost ourselves. And in the mental health arena, when that happens and a person has a brain disorder, they're going to be so sick that they're going to put themselves in harm's way, be it suicide, be it getting with law enforcement, be whatever it is. And what I keep saying is we need to have one-on-one. I really changed my philosophy on mental health here about 5 years ago, where I was so worried about the mental health system and the psychiatrists and the psychologists and the social workers to have them, you know, out there doing their thing, where now I am very much at NAMI. We put a lot of our time on individual support. We get about 300 calls a week of people in crisis. They can't get help. And what we do is try to work with those 300 people. You know, spend as much time as we can with them. They don't get a voice when they call us, our helplines. You know, we've had helplines where it's a machine. They don't get that. But what we do is we try to work with the individual. And what we're finding out by doing that, we are changing some people's lives, not the masses. But, you know, if I can change 1,000 lives here in Ohio from being in a hospital or in a prison for the next 10 years or being on the streets and reunite a family, I've done my job. I've done more than I have by just talking about let's change the world. And when you go back to the politics, we try to change the world, and me and you don't have that capacity. But we certainly have capacity to meet with people and talk to people about right, wrong, and let's talk together. Let's help people. Let's start helping people. You know, one of the problems I have in the social service arena, you know, it's usually a lot of liberal thinkers. And the fact is, I don't find myself as a liberal thinker. I find myself an individual who wants to help people, and I don't know that that's always with money or a service or something out there. I find it It's caring.
You know what?
Caring.
Benjamin Franklin said the best way to help a person in poverty is to make them feel uncomfortable in their poverty. You know, it's not, hey, let me give you things. Like this guy I told you about, this Daniel Sueño or whatever that guy's name was, that went completely off the grid. He gave up every worldly possession because he didn't want to participate in that system. It's not about giving, hey, can you give me my next mortgage payment? Can you give me money? Can you give me a new laptop? Can you give me clothing?
That's not the answer.
That's not the answer.
Work.
And it never has. Like you keep going back to the individual. You got to figure this stuff out on your own. And if you allow people, I mean, we have 53% of the people taking money instead of putting money into a system for an extreme worst case scenario safety net. You know, there are generations of people, trust me, out here in Los Angeles, you see generations of people that think Section 8 housing is it's something I'm entitled to. Well, my mother was on it. Well, my grandfather was on it.
What I would like to see in that Section 8 housing is for me as an individual, instead of supporting it, because I'm going to tell you, have you ever been over to some of the Section 8 housing? I spent a Saturday about a year ago in Dayton, Ohio, where we have mentally ill clients put into these housing projects, and they're in prison, these mentally ill people. So what we're trying to do is get them out of that, and then help them individually live a better life, because I really don't believe, first of all, I may be wrong, but I think most people don't want to live in poverty, don't want to live like this. But our society today has gone the wrong way by giving instead of teaching.
Yeah,
and
teach a man to fish and put your arm around him and say, hey, I love you, man. You know, hey, let's just let me try to help however I can. Can I, you know, a little bit of personal communication. Like I love what you said about call your buddy up who doesn't come out anymore. You've said it twice, and I love it, and it's something I want our listeners and myself. I thought of two people just now, and I'm like, you know, I haven't talked to so-and-so in a while. Well, maybe they're going through some stuff, and you know the person I thought of, their mother was going through, this is another individual, not the one I first mentioned. His parents have been going through some stuff, and one of them just passed away, and one of them had a mental health issue, and it's someone I haven't talked to in, let's just say, far too long. And I think that's a point we can take away from this, obviously.
Let me give you, I'll end this with a little story. This weekend, we had our annual meeting, and 15 years ago, I took a consumer under my wing, an African-American gentleman who was very, very sick. And he loved to carry a briefcase and wear a coat and tie and walk around the city acting as if he wanted to be somebody. So I brought him into the office and gave him some little volunteer things to do. But I also gave him clothes. I gave him ties. I gave him stuff to wear that I was going to give away. I ran into him at this conference this weekend, and he was doing well. He's working. He's doing well. And he looked at me and he says, Terry, he says, I have a picture of you on my dresser. I haven't thought of that man for 10 years. Now, I'm not saying that for me.
No.
I'm saying for all of us, everybody listening.
That. Yeah.
Just take a little extra, and you may change somebody's life. Just take a little extra.
That's a very good point. We're talking with Terry Russell, Executive Director of NAMI, Ohio. That's National Alliance on Mental Illness. We got about 3-4 minutes left here. I wanted to just touch on this. You said, you know, where it usually goes to with mental health issues. And obviously we're talking about this on a sports show, talking about Junior Seau's 43-year-old suicide. Was that related to concussions? Was that related to leaving? Who knows? But it's an excuse to talk about mental health. But you talk about FBI following them. I mean, there are a lot of people that tune into our website at the New American Media that are concerned about the National Defense Authorization Act, something that says that American citizens can be black-bagged, taken and stolen and kidnapped off the street under a suspicion because it's in a time of crisis, without charge, without trial, indefinitely. The Patriot Act under Bush, this is a Republican now, just completely violating the Fourth Amendment against illegal search and seizure, just warrantless wiretaps. It seems like we're headed down it seems like we're headed into a really bad place, and a lot of our listeners are just concerned beyond belief that this is going far beyond just conspiracy theory and a couple of whack jobs and a couple of mentally ill people talking about the FBI following them. it really seems like when the Department of Homeland Security purchases 450 million rounds of hollow point ammunition for no apparent reason after they pass the NDAA, it really seems like something's going on in our government. What would you say to somebody at that point that's starting to consider like the enemy might be within inside our own walls here? Where does that go from rational to mental issue? Because it becomes a very fine line when you read facts and then you make a determination. What would you say regarding these things?
Well, I think, again, the individual review and your listeners to that, and certainly there's credibility about everything you said there. But in my world, I can guarantee you that the people who are telling me the FBI are following them or whatever has nothing to do with reality. This is their voices, and if you suffer from an illness, schizophrenia, where you have voices telling you all kinds of things. Matter of fact, that gentleman one time said to me, the one I just told you about,
right.
He walked to my house and says, "Are you Jesus Christ?" In his mind, the voices were telling him that I was somebody else. And so if he said the FBI was following him, it had nothing to do with what you just talked about and what could be a reality of our society now being invaded, I think, and I do think government's too invasive with our society. That could be or couldn't be, and I think that's for people, rational people, to make decisions. But I just want everybody to know if someone comes up and says to them, the FBI is following me, check that out first to make sure that it's not a mental illness.
Terry Russell has been our guest on today's episode of the Unhappy Hour Sports Program. We obviously took this opportunity to take the Junior Seau story, expand upon mental health and depression and awareness about this important issue because, I mean, one of the best linebackers to ever play the game has left us this week. And, should we have paid more attention 2 years ago after a domestic dispute and he quote-unquote fell asleep as he drove his car off of a cliff? Was that an attempted suicide?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Friends should have.
Yeah, and friends and family, but you know what? Hindsight is always perfect. So let's put that where it belongs up on the shelf and say, moving forward, let's talk to our friends we haven't talked to in a while that haven't come out on a Friday night in a while. Let's give them a call. What else would you say to anybody, Terry, regarding the National Alliance of Mental Illness? Tell somebody how they can get some help if they notice a symptom.
If you're a family member or a person with these illnesses and you just feel that you don't know what to do, you need to go to NAMI California on the website, get all their information and contact them, and they will refer you to a local affiliate. We have affiliates all over, and I think in Orange County there's a number of NAMI affiliates which can really give you the support and your family needs to get through these trying times. It's a tough, mean illness, and NAMI's there to give support.
Absolutely. Terry, I really enjoyed our time together. I know we booked this last minute, and it was really great because I think a lot more people need to wake up and connect with the family and friends that have dropped off out of regular rotation and communication. I think we've all gone through hard times, and some people just get stuck in that rut, like you were saying, and it's up to us to help how we can. And it's not about finances and about getting free stuff. It's about a little bit of love. So, Terry Russell,
appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Executive Director of NAMI Ohio. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. If you or a friend are experiencing some issues, please go ahead and do a Google search on that. We go to startpage.com because they don't record your IP address. But use Google, use Startpage, whatever works as your web browser. But seriously, I mean, let's take a second to think about Junior Seau passing away this week. And think about mental health, and let's not be scared of any stigma. Let's just realize it's just like heart disease or like cancer. It's a physical issue that's causing problems, and it has a very high rate. Maybe not of cure, but it has a high rate of success when you can learn to deal with it. We'll be right back in just a minute. We're going to talk with the founder of Oath Keepers here on the NewAmericanMedia.com. My name is Brian Engelman. Thank you for joining us this Friday. We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Agree to Disagree program on the NewAmericanMedia.com.
Hi, Brian from the NewAmericanMedia.com. Last year I had this idea. I wanted to start a website of my own, not just something, a presence on Twitter, a presence on Facebook, and have a thing. I wanted a website. I wanted a home base for all of the ideas and things I'm interested in. I wanted live radio. I wanted to communicate with the globe. I was tired of being spoon-fed dogma by corporate interests and just, here, believe this, believe this. I said, no, I think there's something underneath the surface, but I didn't know how to do it. So I contacted Ted Distel of DistelDesign.com. Ted walked us through the process of, okay, you want videos, you want to do quotes of the day, you want to have a spiritual section, you want to have a 1984 watch where governments intruding and private corporations are intruding into your privacy. Yeah, those are the things that I was interested in. Ted walked me through the process. We built thenewamericanmedia.com, and I encourage you to go online and take a look at our site. That's what he's capable of. Please, if you have an idea, go to disteldesign.com. That's DISTEL design.com.
Have you ever considered adopting a pet to be part of your family? Our animal companions can be just as close to us as our human companions. If you're considering adoption, please visit your local shelter and adopt a pet today. Shelter pets make the best pets.
Follow the newamericanmedia.com on Twitter at American_media_.
Hi, it's Brian from the NewAmericanMedia.com. I'm a sports fan. I was raised in Cleveland, spent 25 years in Ohio. I watched the drive, the fumble, the shot too. I watched Art Modell steal the Cleveland Browns and win a Super Bowl over in Baltimore. I watched a horrible coach named Bill Belichick go on to the Patriots and win Super Bowls over there. Hooray. I'm a bitter sports fan. Let's not even talk about what happened with he who shall not be named who went to South Beach to take his talents there. Excuse me, I almost threw up in my mouth a little bit there. I'm a sports fan who cares to talk about the things that matter to me. That is the Indians, the Cavs, the Browns, and the Buckeyes. But of course I pay attention to national sports, and we discuss that on our show as well. That's why we have The Unhappy Hour every single Friday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific. Sit down, have a drink. It's the end of a long work week, and we can all get together and talk about the unhappy times that we've had as sports fans. We've all had them. We've had ups and downs, but as Cleveland fans, we only have downs. Join us.